Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. If you have a Bible at home, you need to get it out. If you need to get a pad and a pen. If you are a Bible studier and you want to pen down some statistics from the Old Testament, I'm Brother Peter, and I'm going to give you some statistics. But before I do, I'm going to read you some things about the prophets, and then I'm going to tell you how the prophets worked, where they were from, how God chose them, who they were, what their job was, and what their main prediction was. Now, all the way from Jonah in Nineveh, you remember Jonah was sent to Nineveh. He didn't want to go to Nineveh, but God sent him to Nineveh and to try to save Nineveh. And Jonah didn't want to do that. But let's read about some of the prophets. The main prophets' visions were a new Israel. They were looking for a new Israel to come. And that's what they were prophesying that was going to happen. And they prophesied throughout the Bible. None of the Old Testament prophets prophesied wrongly. They all prophesied exactly what happened. They were all men chosen of God. The power of God came on those men for that period of time and endued those men with the power. Some of them were indwelt by God, and some of them were just covered by God, by the outside covering of God. How that worked, you and I may never know. We'll know in heaven, but we won't know on this earth. So, the prophet's vision was the new age, and that would be the no more sin. They were looking and they sought to usher in the era of righteousness and justice and holiness. Now, they were the men ushering in on the earth, in the earthly sense, what was happening. But the prophets had a spiritual inkling. They knew that when this earth ended, even on up through into the New Testament, they knew after Jesus came and everything that there was going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and the holiness of brotherly love and lasting peace and happiness with each individual would be the love of Jehovah. Now, and when you and I talk about God, we say God. In the Old Testament, they call God Jehovah. And there was many names for Jehovah for different places and different things and where they were. The Jehovah was considered the same God, but a different helper in different places. And with all his heart and soul and might, and Jehovah would be Israel's God and Israel his people. Now, they knew that God had chosen Israel and had chosen them as a prophet to go out and prophesy to those people out there, the Jewish people, about Israel. And many prophecies are fulfilled with the hope and the establishment of God's kingdom upon the earth. An ideal society ruled by a perfect king. That's what they were preaching, that it was going to be an ideal society ruled by a perfect king, which was God himself, was going to rule over the earth. And he is, but it's not going to be this earth. It's going to be a new heaven and new earth, because he's going to rule over this earth for 1,000 years. And then there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth with an ideal society. The earth shall be full of knowledge of God, as the waters cover the sea. By the way, there is a knowledge of God today, as the waters would cover the sea, for all of those of us who care to be in it. If we've asked Jesus, forgive us our sin, come in our heart and save our soul, then we are in that knowledge, the work of righteousness, and that righteousness shall bring peace to those who get in it, and righteousness and quietness and confidence that's forever. I have a quietness and a confidence I never had when I was in the world. And that was brought on, of course. The Old Testament prophets prophesied that was to come, and then the New Testament disciples followed that through. Now, the Old Testament followers followed God without seeing him, because they couldn't see him anyway and look on him, because they would die looking face to face. But they saw him in the Spirit, and they saw him by what he revealed, the Spirit of God that was revealed and rested on them, for the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counseling, the Spirit of knowledge, and the Spirit of God was upon those men for that period of time that they were here. Now the prophets, they were evangelists, just like we're evangelists today. I am an evangelist today out of the church that I go to. I go to a Faith Baptist Church, and I'm an evangelist out of Faith Baptist Church. I'm a bearer of good news. That's what an evangelist is. And as they were too, and they declared the age and the age to come. They were declaring the age they were in and how to act in that age, and they were declaring the age to come, and the purpose of announcing glad tidings of his power to save. Now look, 303 things that were prophesied by prophets in the Old Testament happened at the cross. When Jesus went to the cross, that day that he was on the cross, went on that cross, 303 prophecies were fulfilled that day. Yes, they were evangelists, and they were in preparation of the good news of a later time, and that's what we are too. We're in preparation of the good news for now, Jesus Christ being in you and you being the temple of God. But a later time is going to be when we go to the eternal heaven, eternal abode, and be in eternity with God and with Jesus Christ. And the preparation of the good news later, when God's Son, to reveal more fully his character. Jesus was the Christ and the Messiah. This baffles me that these folks knew all through the Old Testament exactly what was going to happen when Jesus came, and what was going to happen exactly did happen. Exactly. But then God said that he blinded their eyes because of their unbelief. That's the only reason that they don't believe, is because their eyes have been blinded. But any Jew can become a Messianic Jew. That means one that believes in the Messiah, Jesus Christ. If he cares to believe in the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and just say, Jesus, forgive me, I'm a sinner, he will be a saved person. He'll be a saved Jew, and then he'll be a Messianic Jew. You say, well, why don't more Jews do that? Because when they do that, their family writes them off, goes back in their book of history and blots their name out and says, we'll have nothing else to do with you ever again. You're out of our life. Jesus was the Christ. He was the anointed one. He was the king established the spiritual kingdom of God. He is the one to rule as God and in God and the human hearts and lives of a universal kingdom for all people united to serve. All the people that are united to serve in the whole world are part of the kingdom of God and the new kingdom and the kingdom of Christ. And we are to be suffering servants. What is suffering servant? You know something? If I have no desire to smoke, I'm not suffering because I'm not smoking. If I have no desire to drink, I'm not suffering because I'm not drinking. Some of the world would say I would have to suffer to do away or to not do something. If I'm fasting, I'm not suffering to fast. I'm fasting because I love the Lord and I'm doing it for him. Christ was a suffering servant. He was wounded. He was bruised for our transgressions. He was marred for our iniquities. He was the greatest of all of the prophets. John was the last prophet. Jesus was the Son of God, not really a prophet in one sense of the word. John was the last prophet, and John had to die before Jesus did, because John couldn't go to heaven being the last prophet. He had to go to paradise. And by going to paradise, when Jesus took paradise to heaven, John went to heaven early. He went to heaven with all the other prophets, the 24 elders that are set around the table, and the prophets. He is there. Now, it took the transgression and iniquities of all people, good tidings to the poor, proclaimed release to the captivity. He He recovered sight personally. He recovered the sight of the blind. He raised some dead. He healed the leper. He did all of those things. Jesus did. He came not to destroy the Lord, but to fulfill it. He didn't destroy the Lord, he fulfilled it. And like I say, John was the last prophet in the Old Testament. And was filled with a deeper, significant, longer, larger, more wonderful meaning than the Old Testament was Jesus Christ. That he came and for the whole world. I've only got a few minutes to fill this in now. We're going to talk about these Old Testament prophecies. Let's go back to the period. It's about 586 years before Christ. 586 years before Christ. Do you know that 400 years before Christ, God didn't speak to the people anymore? So the fall of Jerusalem happened in 586. Let's look. Elijah and Elisha, two prophets. They prophesied in the northern kingdom in the 9th century. 900 years. The 9th century. 900 years. These two prophets came on the scene. If you'll read and study those, get a book, little book. You can get them cheap, fairly cheap. A who's who in the Bible. And get one for all the men in the Bible. Get a couple of them. Matter of fact, get anything you can. By the way, if you can't afford to buy them, I tell you what you can do. You can go to Barnes & Noble and sit in there and do all the studying you want to do. They have little tables set up and they have little chairs. You can be sat in the comfort of Barnes & Noble and study anything you want to study. If you want to study about these men. Now Jonah. Jonah prophesied in the northern kingdom in the 8th century. So we went from the 9th century to the 8th century. We're going downhill. And then Amos, a little guy named Amos. Hey, these guys were no different than you and I. They were just normal, everyday, average men that God pointed out, picked out and said, I believe this man would do what I asked him to do and follow me. And he used him. Now Amos prophesied in the northern kingdom in the 8th century. Now listen to this. His home was in the southern kingdom. So he left home to prophesy in another country, another kingdom. Now Isaiah prophesied in the southern kingdom. Excuse me, I missed Hosea. Let's see, Jonah, Amos. All right. Now Hosea. Hosea prophesied in the northern kingdom. This was something that he prophesied in the northern kingdom because he was in his own land. And people aren't well accepted in their own land many times. And we see that his home was in the northern kingdom, so he stayed at home and prophesied in that kingdom where he was. And not well accepted, if you please. And if you study him, you study the little book, and you'll see that he wasn't. Isaiah. Isaiah prophesied in the southern kingdom from 740 to 701 or later, possibly. So he's in the 7th century here. And then we're coming down to Micah. Micah prophesied in the southern kingdom from about 724. Now you remember there was a battle. And that battle back in that day separated into southern and northern kingdom. Just like the United States had a civil war. There was a civil war over there. And it became two kingdoms. It was one kingdom. And it became a northern and southern kingdom. And some of the people that were God's chosen people, the Israelites, ended up marrying with foreign people. And they ended up having all kinds of problems. And these prophets were going to them and saying, look, you can't live this way. You can't do this. This is not God's intent for you. This was not God's intention when he chose you as his people. All right. Now, Micah prophesied in the southern kingdom from about 724. And then we have Zephaniah. Zephaniah prophesied in the southern kingdom before the Reformation of Josiah, king of Judah, in 621. This is an interesting story. If you study that, that is one of the most, a very interesting story. Study that. Now, Nahum prophesied in the southern kingdom before the fall of Nineveh in 607 BC and the end of the Assyrian Empire. Now, if you go back and study in the book of Daniel, Daniel's giant statue that has the head and all the way down through, it gives all of these kingdoms that have been prophesied here in that body. They're listed in that body. And I have a breakdown of that. Matter of fact, I have several breakdowns of that I've studied, and they're very interesting. And you could study those. Now, if you've got your Bible out, you can be marking these books and see these prophecies in there. Habakkuk prophesied in the southern kingdom. Jeremiah prophesied in the southern kingdom from 606 until after the fall of Jerusalem. Now we're seeing Jerusalem coming into the picture. And Jerusalem was the city of God. That was the focal point of God. That was the centerpiece of God over there in that land. We saw an exile and the post-exilic period. Now, there was prophets in the post-exile period, and then prophets in the next exile, in Daniel's prophecy in Babylon in the time of the exile. Now, the children of Israel were turned loose by the Babylonians at one time. They were taken in, they exiled out of Egypt. They were taken by other countries, stole away, and that's why I believe that some of the things you see in the Bible, for instance, this lady that was called Rahab the harlot, she was a young lady. She was stolen away by the king of Babylon when she was a young girl. She's put in this palace, and she has these maidens tending to her, and the king says, when she gets of the age where I can use her as my harlot, I'm going to use her, she's going to be my harlot. And this was not a lady that chose to be a harlot. This was a lady forced by a king to be his maidservant in this form. And so a lot of people did not choose what they had. If you read these things, and in Daniel, oh my goodness, the stories in Daniel. Daniel in the lion's den. A man that followed God, that believed God would shut the mouths of the lion. A Daniel that had 3 friends that went into the fiery furnace, said, if our God slay us, we'll just be in heaven. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and they knew it. And so they were. Obadiah. Obadiah prophesies in the time of exile, or about 500 BC. And then Ezekiel comes on the scene. And he prophesies in Babylon from 592 to 570 BC. This is a man prophesying in Babylon. One of God's men over in Babylon. Wow. Man, you know the history of Babylon, how it was. Can you imagine how difficult it must have been for Ezekiel? Wow. And if you read what Ezekiel wrote, you know, they might have thought he was like John on the Isle of Patmos. They might have thought he'd done gone mad and he was crazy the way he wrote. But he wrote about the things that are happening today. You read Ezekiel. You read Ezekiel. You ride on trains. You fly in airplanes. You go in boats. You cross rivers. You have tanks. Ezekiel prophesied all of the stuff we have today. Ezekiel saw it in the future. He saw it from the past to the future. Ezekiel was there. Then we had Haggai. Haggai, he prophesied in Jerusalem, 520 BC. Now we see it coming home, down to Jerusalem. And this is the important part. From Jerusalem. And Zechariah prophesied in Jerusalem, 520 to 518. This is prophesying in the hometown, in the place where God's people were supposed to be following God. Malachi prophesied in Jerusalem, 460 BC. And our last prophet was Joel. And Joel prophesied in Jerusalem up to 400 BC. And for 400 years, God did not speak to the children of Israel. And that ended the Old Testament. Now, the Bible is literature. The Bible is literature. It is not the worldly literature in the sense of the word. It is biblical history literature. Now, Josephus, another guy in the Old Testament, was a writer. He was a historian, and he wrote secular history. He wrote the secular literature. And others did too. There were many others that wrote great literature of the world and about the Hebrew people and the Hebrew literature found in the Old Testament, about its beauty, its form, its wonder, its greatness. Israel was great. God's children were great. In the desert, they're wandering in the desert, and they did great things in the desert. If you will study the tabernacle, study how they built the tabernacle, how they made it, how they formed the things of gold, how they made the bars, how they made the boards that hung. By the way, the walls in the tabernacle were boards, some 20 feet long boards. They had to hand saw them. They sawed those boards, and they made these boards. And they drilled holes in them, and they put a ring in them. And then up here at the top where the bars were, they had hooks. And they hung those boards on them hooks. And that wall were boards there, hanging up. Interesting, very, very interesting. Study some of that stuff out of the Old Testament. You'll find out. It's very interesting. Now, God's concern was with the Hebrew world. Not with the Babylonians, not with the other people. His concern was with the Hebrew children. Yet, he offered Nineveh free pardon. And for a little while, Nineveh acted on that free pardon, but then they rebelled against it, and God had to destroy the place. Okay, excuse me, the literature that's found in the Old Testament has literary form. It is very, very pronounced, very exciting, very interesting. If you want to get in it, very interesting. I have a man friend that has told me that he reads the Bible only as literature, only as different things. And so, but it is interesting in that sense. It has exquisite love stories in it. It has exquisite all kinds of other stories. The story, hey, follow one man through and look at the story of his life and how it's put together and how it's written and how beautiful it is. Man, it's an exciting book. Exciting book. Get you a map book of Palestine and look at the rugged terrain. Look at the fields. Look at the things. Look at David. Look at this little guy David. How he was tending the sheep out there on the mountain. How he could be on one mountain on a green pasture where he wrote the Psalm 23 in green pastures. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in green pastures. He's over here in the green pastures. And he said, the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie in green pasture. He leadeth me beside still waters. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Where did he go into the shadow of the valley of death? Every time he left the green pasture on this mountain, went down into the valley and crossed the waters, the valley of shadow, and came back up on the other side into another green pasture. He literally had to choose to go down through that valley where marauders were. People would steal your flock of sheep. The wolves were there, the lion in that day, and there were lions in Israel. There were bears there then in that day. If you'll study, you'll find out there were bears and there were lions. The lions were extincted later on in that country, but they were there then during David's time. If you remember, David said he killed a lion. He killed a lion and a bear with his bare hands when he stood before Saul and said, this uncircumcised Philistine ain't nothing. I killed a lion and a bear with my bare hand. Hey, read the stories that are in the Old Testament. They are spiritual stories, literary correct, wonderful to read, and beautiful. Look about Palestine, Mesopotamia, and look where who went to get Isaac's wife? Went to get a wife for Isaac, and over there, and look at how things were, and her name was Rebecca, by the way, and read how they were given water. The children of Israel were given water by the rock that followed them in the desert. Jesus said, I was that rock. And he is that rock. And he still is that rock. These words we have in this Bible, living Bible. Jesus said, in the beginning I was the Word. I became flesh and dwelt among you and went back to the Father. Now you can handle me. You can see me. You can read me. You can have me. You can hold me. You can put me in your heart through this Word. This Word that I am. Put it in your heart. We have it in our hand to handle and to hold. Okay. Rebecca appears and things change. Things begin to be different. This guy brought her jewels and all kinds of stuff on the camels. What a story. What a story. Read it. Read it. Find it in the Old Testament and read it. Read the story of it. And Ruth, the story of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabitess. You know where the Moabites came from? You remember when Noah landed the ark, and Noah got drunk. Wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging, the Bible said. Noah got drunk. And when he got drunk, he laid with one of his daughters. His daughter said, there ain't no more people out here on this earth. What are we going to do to make the people go on? So Noah laid with one of his daughters in a drunken stupor. He didn't actually do it. That girl made it happen. And so the Moabites came about. And here's this Ruth girl from down through the history. She's a Moabitess. But she's also in the lineage of Jesus Christ. We don't understand all this stuff. This is stuff made by God. And and Naomi, she went back to Bethlehem, and Ruth went with her. And because of that, she found this Boaz guy. And Ruth and Boaz, if you want to read it now, read the literary sense of it, and then read it as the church and Jesus Christ. As the church. We're like Ruth, came out of Moab. We're like that. We came out of sin and hell and degradation, and God is Boaz. He saved us and gave us a good life and gave us a place where we are today. Now, we came through the prophets, we came through some stuff, and we hit the New Testament. My time has come and gone. I'll get on this subject again one day, and we'll look at it. But our time's come and gone now. This is Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. Get in the Bible and enjoy it. Get in it and enjoy it. Ask God to show you how to enjoy it, and He'll show you.